There, I was standing outside what used to be my home rain, soaking through my jacket, my 6 month pregnant belly making everything harder to bear. Just 3 days ago, I believed my 8 year marriage to David was solid, unbreakable. I thought I could handle the consequences of my choices, that somehow I could make things right. But as I clutched my suitcase with trembling hands, watching the lights go off one by one in the house where I had built my dreams, I realized how wrong I had been about everything. Before I dive into this painful chapter of my life, I would love to know where you are watching from. Please hit that like button if you have ever felt completely lost, and do not forget to subscribe, because sometimes the darkest moments lead to the most unexpected strength. Now, let me take you back to where it all began to unravel. Looking back, I can see all the warning signs I chose to ignore. My marriage to David started like a fairy tale when we met in college. I was 24 studying marketing, and he was this ambitious engineering student who swept me off my feet with his confidence and dreams of building something amazing together. We got married right after graduation, bought our first house together, and spent the first 5 years of our marriage genuinely happy. David was passionate about his career, working his way up at a tech company, and I admired his drive. He would come home excited about new projects, and we would spend hours talking about our future. We planned to start a family, maybe get a bigger house, travel together. Those were the golden years when I felt like we were truly partners in life. But somewhere around year 6, something shifted. David became consumed with climbing the corporate ladder. Our dinner conversations turned into him checking emails on his phone. Date nights became a thing of the past because he was always working late or traveling for business. I tried to be understanding at first. I knew his career was important to him, and I wanted to be supportive. I started putting more effort into making our home perfect, thinking maybe if I cooked his favorite meals or planned special evenings, he would remember what we had together. But every attempt fell flat. He would come home exhausted, eat quickly while scrolling through work messages, and fall asleep on the couch watching television. I felt like I was living with a stranger who happened to share my last name. The loneliness crept in slowly, then all at once. I would wake up in our bed alone because David had fallen asleep in his office again. I would eat breakfast by myself, go to work, come home to an empty house, and repeat the cycle. When I tried to talk to David about how disconnected we had become, he would brush me off, saying he was working hard for our future. But what kind of future were we building if we were not even present for each other? That is when Marcus entered my life. He was hired as a graphic designer at my marketing firm, and from the first team meeting, I noticed how different he was from David. Marcus was 30 years old, recently divorced, and he had this way of really listening when people spoke. During brainstorming sessions, he would ask thoughtful questions about my ideas, build on them, make me feel like my contributions mattered. It started innocently enough. Marcus and I would grab coffee after meetings to discuss projects. He would compliment my creativity, tell me I had a gift for understanding what clients really needed. After months of feeling invisible in my own home, his attention felt like sunshine after a long winter. Marcus shared stories about his divorce, how his ex-wife had made him feel inadequate, and I found myself opening up about my own struggles with David. The first time Marcus reached across the table and touched my hand while I was crying about feeling unwanted in my marriage, I knew we had crossed into dangerous territory. His touch was gentle, comforting, in a way I had not experienced in years. I should have pulled away, should have established boundaries, but I was starving for human connection, for someone to see me as more than just background noise in their busy life. For 2 months, Marcus and I carried on an emotional affair that gradually became physical. We would work late together, finding excuses to be alone in the office. Every touch, every stolen kiss felt like I was finally alive again, but it also filled me with crushing guilt. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I could not find the strength to stop. Marcus made me feel beautiful, wanted, important. With him, I remembered who I was before I became just David's wife. Then came the moment that changed everything. I was late, and at first I told myself it was just stress from the double life I was living. But when the pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines, my world tilted off its axis. The timing made it impossible to know immediately who the father was, though David and I had barely been intimate in months. I secretly arranged for a paternity test as early as safely possible, my hands shaking as I waited for results that would determine the trajectory of my entire future. When the results confirmed that Marcus was the father, I sat in my car in the clinic parking lot and cried until I could not breathe. The weight of what I had done, the complexity of the situation I had created, felt unbearable. I spent weeks trying to figure out how to handle the situation. I researched single motherhood, looked into divorce proceedings, imagined every possible scenario. Part of me wanted to confess everything immediately and face the consequences, but another part of me was terrified of losing everything I had built with David, even if our marriage had become a shell of what it once was. As my pregnancy progressed, the stress of keeping such a massive secret began taking its toll on every aspect of my life. David started noticing changes in my behavior. I was constantly nauseated, not just from morning sickness, but from the anxiety of living a lie. I would find excuses to avoid physical intimacy, claiming I was tired or not feeling well. My appetite disappeared, and I had to force myself to eat to keep up appearances. David, despite being emotionally distant, was not oblivious. He began asking questions about why I was working late so often, why I seemed distracted during our conversations, why I was so moody all the time. Each question felt like a trap, and I struggled to provide answers that would not raise more suspicions. The guilt was eating me alive, but I felt trapped between two impossible choices. Meanwhile, Marcus was growing impatient with the secrecy. He wanted me to leave David and start fresh with him and our baby. He painted pictures of the life we could have together, just the three of us, free from the complications of my failing marriage. Marcus had never been a father before, and he seemed genuinely excited about the prospect, talking about teaching our child to ride a bike, helping with homework, being the kind of present father he felt his own dad had never been. But I was not ready to blow up my entire life based on a relationship that had started as an affair. I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out the right way to handle the situation. I told Marcus I would tell David the truth once I reached the 6-month mark, when the pregnancy was safer, and I felt more prepared for whatever consequences would follow. During this time, I was doing my own research about divorce laws, child custody, financial planning for single mothers. I opened a separate bank account and started saving money from my salary, preparing for the possibility that David would cut off financial support once he learned the truth. I consulted with a lawyer about my rights and options, though I was not ready to file any papers yet. The stress was affecting my health and the pregnancy. My doctor expressed concern about my elevated blood pressure and weight loss despite being pregnant. I had to lie to her too, claiming work stress and marriage difficulties without revealing the full scope of what I was dealing with. Every appointment felt like another performance where I had to pretend everything was manageable. At home, the tension continued building. David would come home from work and find me sitting quietly, lost in my own thoughts, and he would ask what was wrong. I would make up stories about difficult clients or workplace drama, anything to deflect from the real source of my distress. Sometimes I caught him studying my face like he was trying to solve a puzzle, and I wondered if he suspected something specific or just sensed that something was fundamentally wrong. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in my 6th month. David had been traveling for work and decided to come home a day early to surprise me. He had picked up takeout from my favorite restaurant and even bought flowers, clearly trying to make a romantic gesture that might bridge the growing gap between us. I was in our bedroom, talking on the phone with Marcus about a doctor's appointment, when I heard David's key in the front door. I panicked and tried to end the call quickly, but not before saying something about making sure our baby is healthy. The words hung in the air as David appeared in the bedroom doorway, his face shifting from confusion to shock to something much darker. David stood frozen for a moment, the takeout container still in his hands, flowers dropping to the floor. Then he demanded to know who I'd been talking to and what I meant about our baby. There was no way to deflect or explain away what he had heard. 8 years of marriage, and it all came crashing down in that single moment when my carefully constructed lies finally collapsed. The confrontation that followed was the most brutal conversation of my life. David demanded the complete truth, and I found myself spilling everything through tears and hyperventilation. I told him about Marcus, about how lonely and invisible I had felt in our marriage, about the affair, about the pregnancy, about the paternity test results. With each revelation, I watched something die in David's eyes. David's reaction progressed through several stages, each one more terrifying than the last. First came the shock, where he just stared at me like I was a stranger. Then came the questions fired at me like bullets. How long had it been going on? How many times had I been with Marcus? Did I love him? Had I ever loved David? How could I do this to our marriage? But it was when David moved into cold, calculated anger that I truly became frightened. He called Marcus right there in front of me, putting the call on speaker so I could hear every word. David told Marcus in a voice I had never heard before that he knew everything, that Marcus was never to contact me again, and that if he tried to interfere in the divorce proceedings, David would make his life very difficult. Marcus, clearly panicked by the aggressive tone, agreed immediately and hung up without even asking to speak to me. David then turned to me with that same frightening calm and told me I had exactly 2 hours to pack my essential belongings and leave his house. When I tried to explain, to apologize, to ask for a chance to work things out, he held up his hand and said he never wanted to see my face again. The man I had been married to for 8 years looked at me like I was something disgusting he had found on the bottom of his shoe. I packed through tears, 6 months pregnant, and trying to figure out what I would need for an indefinite period away from home. David stood in the hallway watching me, not helping, not speaking, just making sure I did not take anything he considered his. When I asked where I was supposed to go, he shrugged and said that was no longer his problem. Walking out into the rain that night, carrying a suitcase and my purse, feeling my baby moving inside me, was the lowest point of my entire life. I called Marcus from the parking lot of a nearby motel, desperate for the support he had promised me, only to discover that David's phone call had completely spooked him. Marcus said he could not see me anymore, that he was sorry, but he could not handle the drama and complications. The man who had claimed to love me and want to build a family together abandoned me the moment things got difficult. I spent that first night in a cheap motel room, lying on scratchy sheets, feeling my baby kicking while I cried until I was dehydrated. I had lost my husband, my home, my financial security, and the man I thought would help me through this transition. I was completely alone, facing single motherhood with limited resources and no clear plan for the future. The divorce proceedings that followed were deliberately cruel. David hired an expensive lawyer and immediately filed papers citing adultery and seeking to leave me with as little as possible. He froze our joint bank accounts, canceled the credit cards I had been using, and removed me from our health insurance policy. Every move was calculated to force me into a position of complete dependency and desperation. I had to scramble to find legal representation with the small amount of money I had managed to save in my secret account. The lawyer I could afford was overworked and not particularly skilled at dealing with vindictive spouses who had significant resources. David's legal team filed motion after motion, each one designed to drain my finances and energy. During this period, I was also dealing with the physical and emotional challenges of pregnancy while living in temporary housing and working full-time to support myself. The stress was constant, and my doctor warned me multiple times about the potential risks to both me and the baby if I could not find ways to manage my anxiety and stabilize my living situation. But something began shifting inside me during those darkest weeks. As I sat in legal meetings, listening to David's lawyer describe me as an unfaithful wife who deserved nothing, I started recognizing patterns I had ignored throughout our marriage. David's need to control his way of making me feel small when I disagreed with him, his tendency to withdraw affection as punishment for perceived slights. I realized that his current behavior was not just about the affair, it was an extreme version of how he had always operated in our relationship. That realization sparked something fierce inside me. I decided I was not going to let David destroy me completely just because I had made a terrible mistake. I borrowed money from my sister to hire a better lawyer, one who specialized in cases involving financial abuse during divorce proceedings. I started documenting every vindictive action David took, building a case that his behavior was excessive and punitive beyond what the situation warranted. For the first time in years, I found my voice and started fighting back. The turning point in my legal battle came when my new lawyer was able to demonstrate that David's actions went far beyond protecting his interests and crossed into financial abuse designed to force me into poverty. We documented how he had frozen accounts containing my salary contributions, canceled insurance I needed for prenatal care, and attempted to force me out of our shared home without any transition period or support. Despite his expensive legal team, David had overplayed his hand. Our state had no fault divorce laws, which meant that while adultery was morally wrong, it did not legally justify leaving a pregnant spouse destitute. The judge was particularly unimpressed with David's attempt to cancel my health insurance while I was carrying a child, regardless of paternity. When the final settlement was reached, I was awarded 50% of our marital assets, including the right to remain in our house until after the baby was born. David was also required to maintain my health insurance and pay temporary support, though the child support question would be resolved once paternity was legally established after birth. The victory felt surreal after months of feeling powerless. David's lawyer had assured him that adultery would guarantee a favorable outcome, but they had underestimated both my determination and the legal system's protections for vulnerable spouses. When the judge announced the settlement terms, I watched David's face turn red with fury, but there was nothing more his expensive lawyer could do. 3 months later, I gave birth to Emma, a healthy 7-pound baby girl with dark hair and curious eyes. The moment I held her, everything else faded into background noise. She was perfect innocent of all the chaos that had surrounded her conception and birth, and I felt a fierce protectiveness unlike anything I had ever experienced. The paternity test after Emma's birth confirmed what I already knew: Marcus was her biological father. But when my lawyer contacted him about establishing paternity and child support, we discovered he had moved across the country and changed jobs. He had made it clear through his avoidance that he wanted no part of fatherhood, despite all his earlier promises about being a present, loving parent. Rather than feeling devastated by Marcus's abandonment, I felt relieved. Emma and I did not need someone in our lives who would run away the moment things became challenging. I had learned too much about my own strength to settle for unreliable people, regardless of their biological connection to my daughter. Adjusting to single motherhood was exhausting, but surprisingly fulfilling. Every milestone Emma reached felt like a celebration of our resilience. I learned to manage nighttime feedings, diaper changes, and working full-time with a determination I never knew I possessed. My colleagues were supportive, offering flexible scheduling and understanding when I needed to attend pediatric appointments. I joined a single mother support group where I met women who had walked similar paths for different reasons. Listening to their stories helped me understand that there were many ways families could be broken apart and rebuilt stronger. Some had faced death of spouses, others had escaped abusive relationships, and a few like me had seen marriages destroyed by their own mistakes. Through therapy, I worked on understanding the underlying issues that had led me to seek emotional validation outside my marriage. I learned about setting boundaries, communicating needs directly, and recognizing the difference between loneliness and love. The therapist helped me separate my guilt about the affair from my right to be treated with basic human dignity during the divorce. 2 years after Emma was born, I was promoted to senior marketing manager at my firm, a position that came with increased salary and better benefits. I used the additional income to move us into a safe neighborhood with good schools, creating the stable home environment I wanted Emma to have as she grew up. I began dating carefully with clear priorities about what I needed in a partner and what I would not tolerate. I introduced Emma only to people I had been seeing for several months and who had demonstrated consistency and kindness. My standards were higher now, informed by hard-won wisdom about the difference between chemistry and compatibility. The relationship I built with my sister grew stronger during this period as well. She had been my lifeline during the darkest months, providing both emotional and financial support when I needed it most. My parents, after working through their initial disappointment, became devoted grandparents who helped with childcare and celebrated every step of Emma's development. Reflecting on that night when I stood in the rain outside my former home, I can hardly recognize the woman I used to be. That person was willing to accept crumbs of attention and affection, to stay in a relationship that made her feel invisible, to seek validation in all the wrong places. The woman I became through necessity is someone who knows her worth, who demands respect, who can build a life independently while remaining open to real partnership. I never tried to contact David again, and he made no effort to reach out to me. Sometimes I wonder if he found happiness with someone else, if he learned anything about emotional availability from our failed marriage. But mostly, I focus on the life Emma and I have built together, one that is full of genuine connection and mutual respect. My daughter is now a confident toddler who fills our home with laughter and curiosity. She will grow up knowing that her mother fought for their future, that mistakes do not define us permanently, and that sometimes the worst things that happen to us create space for better things to grow. The affair was wrong, the lies were wrong, and I take full responsibility for those choices. But David's response taught me that someone can be technically right about your mistakes while still treating you in ways that are fundamentally wrong. Adultery does not justify cruelty, and guilt does not mean you deserve to be destroyed. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best version of yourself. I never thought I would be grateful for that rainy night when I stood outside my former life, but it was the first step toward finding my true strength. Have you ever had to rebuild your life from scratch after everything fell apart? What helped you find your strength in the darkest moments? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear that they are stronger than they know. Do not forget to subscribe for more real stories about finding hope in difficult times. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that your mistakes do not define your future. You have more strength inside you than you realize.